Just a quick note, listeners. Apologies for the poor audio quality in this episode. That was definitely my user error. But the content was so good, we couldn't not share. Welcome to the Westminster Tradition podcast, unpacking lessons for the public service, starting with the Robo-Debt Royal Commission. My name is Caroline Crose-Barlow. I am a recovering public servant. And joining me today is my fellow recovering public servant and now Managing Director of Good Government Advisory, Danielle Elston.
Hello, Caroline.
And much more excitingly, our very
That's a bit rude.
For those of you who haven't been able to guess who our very exciting guest is, former Senator, the Honourable Amanda Vanstone AO. Hello.
Well, hello, girls. How are you today?
We
hello,
are excellent.
girls. That's what you hear when you walk into a bar, isn't it? Yeah.
It is.
Hello, girls.
And some meetings.
That's true too. Now look, Amanda, we are very excited. We are very excited to have you along today. Mm-hmm. For those people who aren't familiar with your CV, am I allowed to cover it, or would you like to tell us a little bit about it?
Oh, look, it's pretty easy, really. I left school. I went to work for Myers because I wanted to be a buyer. I learned as much there as I learned at university. They were great employers. Gave me time off during the day to go off and do university work.
Wow.
And then I got into Parliament.
Why did you go to Parliament? Oh, sorry.
Well, no, actually, then I qualified for law and practiced law briefly. And I think that law firm paid the Liberal Party to take me. He will give you a big donation, put her on the Senate list. And then I got elected. And I can remember Tony saying, I said, I don't know about this. You know, we hadn't been married long. It's a long time away, blah, blah, blah. And he said, look, having won the spot, I'd be disappointed if you didn't finish the
Your
6
term.
years, but
Yeah.
it isn't a prison sentence. Don't think of it that way. If it's too terrible, you can quit 21 years later. That's how that worked.
I sense from this that you are not a quitter, and also...
No, I love the things I see on my social media feed. Never give up. They're usually some terrible thing about a jaguar or a lion chasing an impala, and the impala doesn't give up. And the impala gets away.
Yeah.
It just says, never give up. Never just say, oh, I'm dead.
So you are the impala in this situation?
Yeah, you just don't give up.
Yeah, I love that. So you entered Parliament in 1984, is
Something
that
like
right?
that. I'll give you an example of not giving up. I got the flick out of Cabinet the first time, rudely I thought, because I'd achieved everything Howard had asked for, which was a huge amount of the initial government savings when we won in 96-7. Mm-hmm. Like it was about, I don't know, I can't remember the proportion, but it was huge.
I looked it up the other
All
day. I
out
thought
of
it was
my
like
portion
half.
of the portfolio, not schools, just universities and employment programs. We got all those savings, got everything achieved, and still I got the flick. Well, you can't make yourself popular saying to people, guess what, you're going to get less or pay more. Mm-hmm. They usually don't say, that's great, I love you.
No.
They don't do that. Anyway, I got the flick out, and the guy who's my chief of staff stayed.
Oh.
And that's a mark of loyalty. Some would say,
is.
well, you're not a
Lot of
cabinet
salary.
minister, you know, I'm going to greener fields.
Absolutely.
And he said, look, think of this like a football thing. You're just a bit of time in the back pocket. So, at Christmas, Boxing Day, I got up at God knows what hour and went over to Melbourne, and we did a press conference thing because the Federal Police had done some work on fake Bradman memorabilia. And, of course, there was the test match.
Such a Boxing Day
story.
Got back in time for Boxing Day lunch with friends. And the next time I was at the airport, some Conservative guy came up to me and said, you're never going to bloody give up, are you? I said, no. I'm getting back into that cabinet. I'm not giving up.
Even if I have to talk about Don Bradman every day for the rest of my life.
No, Boxing Day at 9 in the morning was pretty harsh.
Yeah.
I don't know. What I'm hearing here is that you really knew your audience, because this is Prime Minister Howard, right? Like, he loved his cricket.
He would have been listening to the... Mm-hmm. He would have known I was there.
That's exactly
without
right.
me telling him, because he's a cricket fan. Fanatic, sorry.
Those savings, that first part of the Howard government,
Yeah.
I mean, all ministers were making big savings, but you had...
No, they weren't all making big savings. They were talking big about savings.
Delivery, different.
Delivery's different, yeah.
How do you induct yourself to a department when your job... It's different when you've got a long history as a minister and the economic circumstances change, but to be fresh
New.
and new with such a big savings target. How do you build a relationship knowing that with the service, like with your secretary?
Public service did it for me. One of the best public servants I worked with was one where a Victorian senator came to me and said, get rid of him. He's Labor. You don't want him. He's like that with him, crossing the fingers. I said, well, we'll see about that. Because, we wouldn't put up with it if Labor got in and sacked Liberals. So I think we'll follow the behaviour we expect from them. He was fabulous. He came and said, look, I've seen you haven't been on education committees and I know you've got a big ask. Here's my plan. I'll come to you with about, 8 or 10 proposals of where you could put this money together.
Yeah.
And it'll be just 1 or 2 sentences. And I'm sure some of them you'll say, nah, forget that. We'll cut it down to 6 maybe, and then 4, and then 2, and we'll work on it. And so over probably 2 weeks, I can't remember exactly, it doesn't matter, that's what we did.
Wow.
And as we got to a smaller number, the detail got bigger, and you could get a clearer picture on whether you'd say yes or no. So by the end of that process, I had a pretty good idea about how things would work and how they wouldn't. For example, in putting extra fees on different degrees, what difference did it make if you put it on law versus dentistry or something?
Yeah.
What's the cost of dentistry to universities versus law?
Yeah.
Law's cheap as chips.
Of course.
Cheap as chips. You just need a library, and now you don't need a library, you've got the internet.
Yeah,
and you
that's
turn them
true.
through. Dentistry or medicine, on the other hand, you need a lot of equipment and
Supervisors. And,
a lot of very expensive, so it makes a big difference. So he was just fabulous. It would have been a disaster to say get rid of him. Absolute disaster. One of the best I worked with.
How did you know, how did you know you could trust him, that he wasn't serving you up things that were going to be terrible?
Well, I'm not a complete moron.
That does help.
I have some moronic qualities and some idiot qualities, and everyone does.
Yeah.
But, you've got to have some brains to be able to say to a public servant, well, what does that mean? How would that work? Who's in charge of that?
Yeah.
Who monitors that?
Yeah.
How do we know when that's not working? So you ask questions, and you can usually tell when you're talking to anyone, public servant, mate, the person you first meet, whether they've got any brains and they're talking to you directly or whether they're obfuscating.
Yeah, making it up as
So
well.
I just asked. I just realised I had someone who knew the lot. What a luxury, sitting in front of you, someone who knows everything. And you can just ask whatever you like.
It is amazing.
How lucky is that?
That's so cool.
Do you think, that first period of savings, we are now, I think we're getting worse at stopping
Phillips was his surname.
Phillips.
I think it was David.
David Phillips. We have efficiency dividends. So now it's take 10% off or take 5% off.
And it's just finance being lazy.
Right. But then you don't have necessarily a political authorising environment to stop something for the 10%. So you're constantly just carving out of everything. Do you think there's less courage? I mean, you had to stop a lot of things to make those savings, make big decisions. Do you think that's harder now?
Look, I'm not there, I don't know, and I haven't been there since 2007, so, a bit out of date, really.
But do you think stopping things
generally,
is hard?
I think making a clear decision is better than faffing at the edges.
Yeah.
Most people are not stupid. I mean, there's a lot of stupidity around, but most people are pretty sensible. If you say to them, look, we've got a choice. We can keep paying for this. We're not getting a dividend from it. It's not working. There'll be a few unhappy people when we cut it, or we can keep paying. We think it's not wise to keep paying. Most people would say, yeah, a bit stupid.
Yep.
They're not stupid in their own life. Like Thatcher used to say, I'm a grocer's daughter. Grocers have to make ends meet, and they know mums and dads have to make ends meet.
Yeah.
If you talk to people as though they're people in their lives, they'll get it.
But they do worry about losing things, don't you think?
Of course they do. That's why this election, for example, is all about what are you going to get?
Yes.
Oh, I'm going to give you money to make energy cheaper. No, you're not making energy cheaper.
No, just paying for some of it.
You're paying for some of it. You're asking other taxpayers to agree that you redistribute your tax collections so that some people get energy cheaper. I don't see much in the way of structural reform to actually change things as opposed to shift money around.
Yeah.
And that's why Kennedy's inaugural speech so much of it still rings true. apparently they put hours and hours and days into that.
Yeah.
You know, it's not what you can do, your country can do for you, what you can do for your country. And what we see here is, what are you going to do for me?
Yeah, I was listening to...
And that's why it still bites.
It does. It really resonates. It really resonates. I was listening to a great podcast with the brilliant electoral historian whose name...
Yes.
I will look it up and insert it, but she was saying, you know, one of the defining features of Australian democracy as opposed to kind of United Kingdom democracy or United States democracy is we were founded with a giant subsidy from the UK, and so we have this sense that government is there to give you something. That's like literally the first 100 years of government of Australia.
Incidentally, why do you call yourself the Westminster tradition when other people call us the Washminster? Because they're not exactly the same as the UK.
No, I think we just thought it was a bit catchy, to be honest.
Fair enough.
Oh, I also think
You got to catch people. And most people, if you said Washminster, they think, what are you talking about?
They think you're having a stroke.
I think the other part is that the public service is going through a period of trying to recalibrate in a much faster moving environment. And so, like, how do you do new skills of giving frank and fearless advice and in an environment where the politics is now hour by hour, like the 24-hour news cycle started 20
Makes
years
it harder
ago,
for public service
but
as
we're
well.
now an hour. Like, it's not a 24-hour news cycle, it's an hour news cycle now. How do you keep
Must be very hard.
to some of those traditions? And so that's probably the other part of it. We haven't redefined how you deliver public service advice and services in this new world of speed and people having democratic internet access to services and ministers and all sorts of things. And so I think there's value, it might just be the historian or the wannabe historian coming out in me, value in remembering what the whole purpose of the founding of all of this was in relation to the services relationship to ministers. Like, the first episodes of this podcast were about robo-debt, and what you saw in all the evidence was public servants taking advice from talkback radio. So taking cues from ministers saying, oh, I've got an idea about this, and rushing off and preparing proposals instead of a more traditional, and I hate the word traditional, but of taking a brief. Here's your brief to the service. You come back to me in a few weeks telling me how we're going to do it. It's this, you're only a good public servant now if you anticipate you mind read the future direction based on kind of media.
Yeah, but that's still, in my view, in the end, the minister's responsible and has to say, that's not what I want. Or is there something else you can tell me?
Yeah.
You know?
Questions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about the people you worked with, but it's not true that everyone on the public service gives free and fearless advice.
Oh, 100% it's not true.
You know, you look at some briefs and think, if I don't agree with this, this is going to be leaked. For sure.
That's a hard
And then
feeling.
there'll be a headline, Minister rejected departmental advice. So I think the thing to do with that brief is to send it back with what other options are there.
Yeah, because it should have come up with options in the first place.
Oh, it might have had options, none of them attractive, except the one they want you to go for.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want that. No, oh, is that the only, you know, what other feasible options are there?
Yeah.
And if you can't think of any, give it to another public servant.
When did the public service turn you around when you were thinking of going in a different direction?
Oh, let me think.
Just based on those kind of briefs.
Well, maybe more sceptical. One time I was came up and said, look, this is just urgent. You know, it's Friday night or Thursday afternoon, whatever, you're rushing to get the plane. Could you just sign this? It's just urgent. The best thing you can say when someone says this has to be done on Friday is, what happens if I don't? And you usually don't. What do you mean? What happens if I don't? Well, nothing. Right, okay, give it to me Monday. Bye.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, they will try and rush you into something.
Yeah.
And they'll try, in that instance, it was something to do with car parks in the ACT. I mean, who gives a rat's? Who gives a rat's? No, I had the job for the ACT. Let me help you. No one outside the ACT gives a damn.
Oh, Minister, can I tell you some of the trickiest issues I've ever dealt with in government have been car parks. People treat them like children, and removing, changing, moving, anything to do with car parks, I would always be like, is there any way I can remove this from being my responsibility?
It's true, and not to...
But that's a problem for ACT people. Other people don't care.
Don't care at all. It's very true. It's very true. Minister...
Why
I'm
is this
calling you
minister
Minister.
stuff?
Oh, no, Danielle's got me in a bad habit.
2007.
Yeah.
Oh, because old habits die hard when I'm in front of a minister.
They do. On the question of structural reform, though, like I've been, for different reasons, thinking a bit about the creation of Centrelink and the Commonwealth Employment Services. I mean, you oversaw...
With Jocelyn Newman, yeah.
With Jocelyn Newman, some of the biggest reforms, big structural reforms.
They were big. I mean, what kind of idiot had a rule, somebody, hope it wasn't someone I knew, that said when you build or lease an office for a DSS or CES, apparently it has to be within 15 or 20 minutes of the other, so that mums with kids can walk between the two. Why not go the next step and put them together? There's an idea. So we just put them together.
You did. How? I was so
And incidentally did not muck up the IT, which was a nightmare.
Which is always the hardest part.
Yeah, it certainly is.
How did you go about... So Jocelyn Newman's doing her bit in, like, unemployment welfare benefit reform. You're doing employment services reform. How did you go about kind of coming together to oversee this, like, multi-agency...
No, I had to go into one portfolio rather than went into hers to do it. You couldn't have two ministers arguing about that.
So you had to give up.
Stupid little things. It wouldn't work.
Did you... And so, like, that's an act of... It's hard to see ministers enjoying that. So...
You need to get it done.
Relationship with her?
Your focus has to be get the job done.
I love this, although I would suggest that's not always the focus.
Oh, you might think, I did think, well, why not in my portfolio? Yeah, sure, but what's the consequence of that? Well, no big deal.
Because you need a clear kind of authorising environment.
To do a big thing like that, you need clear authorisation for people to get on with the job.
Yeah, because there's nothing worse than when you organise... You might have a board, a CE, a minister, and everyone's heading in different directions, or two ministers.
People trying to do the job just want an answer. They want some direction.
Yes.
Why is it so hard sometimes to get that direction?
Well, there are occasions when you just don't want to make the decision. you know it's going to be very unattractive, and you just think, oh, I wish this would go away, and it won't. You know it won't.
Yeah.
You know you've got to bite the bullet, but you might pussyfoot for a week or two.
Yeah.
Hoping that someone comes up with some grand alternative plan, and then they don't.
But you've got to have that courage to create losers. So, and I don't mean personally even, but there was a landlord somewhere when you merged those two offices that lost out. I mean, one of my beefs in life is why in regional towns with small governments we have 9 leases on the same strip, and why you wouldn't just put all the state government services under a couple of leases. Partly because the Westminster silo thing says this department needs to, like, everyone's running their own races.
So you were around the creation of Centrelink. We're a bit interested in Centrelink, obviously, because we've come from Robodat, and we talked to Sue Varden, who
I think was one of the best public servants I worked with.
Well, and she says you're one of the best ministers she ever worked with.
So I must send her some money.
Mutual love affair.
Well, she doesn't want money. I'll send her wine or flowers or something.
I think that seems more up her alley. Or baked goods.
Baked goods, okay.
So you do those years in employment, and then, as you say, you're unceremoniously turfed out to justice for a little while.
Which was actually a good thing for me.
Yeah? Why was that?
Well, working with coppers was terrific. I mean, they're where the rubber hits the road.
That's true.
You know, they're standing between you or your kid and a drug dealer or a drunk driver.
Yeah.
And you might joke about the cops, as people do. Oh, just a mug copper. Till they're in a shopping centre and someone's running around with a knife. And then they're very happy to see a copper. And I found them very practical people who just got on and got the job done. As you know, we sent peacekeepers to Timor, which was a fantastic contribution. They were there well before the military got there. You might not know that because the military's got such good media. Everyone knew when they were there. But the coppers were there, and they did a fantastic job. And they were just great people to work with.
Yeah. So you enjoyed working with them.
I'll give you an example. I'm not having a go at DFAT, but as an example, a DFAT person might give you a brief that would say, we expect Vietnam will vote this way at a meeting.
Yeah.
And then when Vietnam doesn't, they say, well, actually, they met with some people the day before and they changed their mind. That's okay then. All that you told me was rubbish. Or not rubbish, but it falls apart.
Yeah.
So that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Coppers can't do that.
No.
You know? They've got to know where the crook is.
It's a
and
more
catch 'em.
black and white.
Very
kind of-
black and white.
It's interesting though, because outside of the ACT, the Australian Federal Police are probably a very unknown quantity in states and.
Well, that's how we got them more money, because they wanted more money. I said, you're never going to get more money until you tell people what you do.
Yeah.
For God's sake. Because they say, oh, that's operational. So I'd say, well, you keep it to yourself then, and you'll get less and less money. So here's what I think we ought to do. When you've got a drug thing happening, like we know there's drugs coming, we've got, what do you call it,
Border
Intelligence?
control or
no, we're tapping phones.
wire intercepts.
We know they're coming. We know they're coming in a couple of days. We've got people in the sandhills. We've got people in the hills behind. You know, we've got other boats. We're watching what's happening. We know the boat's coming.
Wow.
What we ought to do, you have to tell me that so that I can tell my media person. Oh, I can't tell the media. It's my media person. He's not going to tell the media.
Yeah.
But he needs a shell release.
Yeah, ready to go.
Why? Well, because when you nab these people at 4 a.m, we want to be on radio at 6 at the start. And he won't be able to do that if you have to give him the information then. So we want to just drop in the amount you've got, you know.
Yeah.
Drop in the final details. Polish it up, have it at 6. I said, yes, it is a good idea, because we'll get the 7, 8, 9 o'clock news. By 10, we'll have someone in a uniform sitting behind a table with all the drugs, and that'll be TV. And then, in the afternoon, we'll have the police commissioner, and you'll be on night telly. So you'll have all day. And someone will know what you're doing.
And people will feel...
So we did that for a bit, and then, which was a huge leap of faith, and to be fair, we didn't do it that often, I'd ring the Prime Minister, or someone would ring the Prime Minister's media person and say there'll be a drug bust tomorrow. And they loved it, loved knowing what was going on. Well, when you know what's going on, you don't mind giving it money.
No. I really think that that's such a fundamental part, and I think that the public service is quite squeamish about talking about what it's doing and its achievements.
Well,
I think partly because it opens the door to, but I didn't get one and you forgot this drug,
we allowed the first, what do you call it, draft, or whatever you call it, model run of what is now called border protection or something.
Yeah.
And I thought, that won't work. No idiot bringing in illegal stuff will agree to be filmed. Well, I hadn't thought it through. Of course they'll agree, because if they say no, they're immediately under suspicion.
It's so true.
So they say yes, suckers.
Oh, my God.
And it's really popular. You know why? People like to see. That's their money being spent.
Yes.
And they like the program. I don't. It bores me. But, you know, I've seen it all before. But people, that's our money at work.
But that's the same with schools, hospitals.
Yes.
The stuff you don't see that's not very obvious, like liquor regulating, or it's all, if we don't tell people what they're paying for, like
They think you're wasting it.
If you know, the money the bank takes off me, they send me 700 things telling me that they've given me a new app and they, you know, got a new financial advisor service, all of which I pay no attention to.
Yeah.
But the public does not get enough of a sense of what they're paying for, and yet the public service can be quite squeamish about saying we've done well.
This is what we do. Yeah.
Partly because I think there's that sensitivity for you can never please everyone, you can't give everyone everything.
No,
and
but
so
you can't.
the minute you say we got one or we've done good, someone might say,
Not for
my
me.
kid didn't get one, or whatever else.
And someone will.
But that
That's
should
life.
put us off. Like,
That's life. I mean, it's like dealing with asylum seekers who are mistakenly frequently called refugees. We haven't worked out whether they are yet or not when they're an asylum seeker. But you have miles of people who want a virtue signal that they're caring. So they say, this is a really nice person, the kids are nice, they fit in the community, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's not the test. There's how many million people around the world who need to be relocated? And how many million of them would be nice people with nice kids? Lots. So that isn't the criteria. That's just you think this person is nice. So it's hard to say, well, that might be true, but that's not what counts. You know, we've got to have a rule here. We haven't got open doors, so we set up rules and we follow the rules.
Yeah,
so you and your virtue signalling can, nick off. Well, they don't want to that.
I do think sometimes we're very uncomfortable, both in the public service and more broadly, with saying there are limits. Like, not
there are.
everyone... I know.
On everything.
But it's, watching it play out in this NDIS conversation at the moment.
Oh, don't
it's
go
like
there.
the combination of everyone can see that the spend is very high and much higher than anticipated, but at the same time, there's a real reluctance to say, and in changing that means some people who are currently getting something through the program won't get it. That is very hard for public servants and ministers, and even shadow ministers, to say out loud.
Yeah.
We use language like efficiency or it's like all this wow language.
Yeah, I know. Well, someone told me, I'll see if I can find it, that there's an auction house. I'll look later.
Yeah.
And it is auctioning an NDIS registration.
Oh, Jesus.
Get that?
That's...
and the truth is, you put a bucket of money anywhere, not just in the public service, anywhere, crooks will come.
Yeah.
Indonesian minister famously said to me one day, you put sugar on the table, the ants will come.
That's brilliant. Our friend Alison says whenever anyone says there's an innovation crisis in Australia, they haven't looked at what's happening in the big government-funded programs, because people are very innovative
Sure
in how
they
they...
you buy a block of land out somewhere, you whack some houses on it that have got disabled access, sign up as an NDIS person, whack a few people in, get huge payments, maybe put them in conditions that are not satisfactory. You don't provide everything you're meant to.
Yeah.
After 4 years you've paid off your houses, get rid of the people, sell your houses and you're done.
But these are
There
those...
are people who think like that, and that's the problem.
There are.
You have basically decent people in the public service, basically decent people in politics who don't think, how can I scam the system?
Yeah.
And that's what you need, and that was good for me being with the coppers, because I did learn to sort of start to think, how would someone scam that? Because the coppers have to think that way.
Yeah. They
What's the
have
way
to
around
know
that? What will
human
they do
nature.
to get around that?
Yeah.
But also it's interesting that to me, I have quite an interest in Medicare fraud. And I think it's interesting, like, two things. One is the more we target, the more money we spend trying to do compliance. So the narrower the door is, the more money we spend trying to figure out if you're supposed to go through it or not. And the second, I think, part is it's a class thing in some ways, which is we do tend to go after compliance on the people with the least number of lawyers to have an argument back with you.
Yeah.
And we tend to do less of that compliance on company tax fraud, Medicare fraud, and people for whom it's expensive for the government to argue with, because they will go and get a lawyer and determine why they may or may not have been correct. And it's an expensive compliance activity. And that, to me, the cost of compliance is often too heavily weighed.
Understand that. It's along those lines, not exactly, but I think you'll see the parallel, that we spent a bit of effort publicising the chase for Skase.
Yes.
I wasn't chasing his money, someone else had the job to do that. Mine was to try and get him back. And so we, for example, he got a new passport.
That's right.
He wanted a new passport.
Yeah.
And we took his old passport and didn't give him back and didn't give him a new one.
Yeah.
Do you know it was a young woman who was apparently sitting in on a meeting in Attorney General's? I think she was a graduate intake person. There were all these guys sitting around the table. Oh, what are we going to do? Blah, blah, blah. She said, why don't you take his passport? And they said, well, he doesn't need to travel. He's already got a bank account somewhere else. He has travelled, obviously, some way. Or got them to give him the account without going there. What good would that be? And she said, well, he'll need it for identification to open any new accounts and for a whole lot of financial transactions if he wants to buy or sell property. So I'd keep the passport.
I love this. And also
Terrific.
just
And
a real life experience.
we took the passport and it worked a dream. So we got a lot of publicity for that.
Yeah.
And the purpose of that was, when someone said, well, you might not get him, I said, no, but it's really important for people to understand that if there's a young teenager, maybe part Aboriginal, who steals a car, we'll go to them and try and put them in jail. And you're telling me we should let some rich guy tick off with pensions and super funds to Mallorca and not ruin his life?
Yeah.
Are you joking? Of course we're going to make it that he's going to worry every time he steps out of there if he puts his foot in the country where we can nab him. Of course we're going to have him worried about that. We don't want him ever to have a happy day. And I think I can happily say that when his wife came back after he died...
He hadn't had any happy days under your watch.
I wouldn't have given her citizenship back, but the junior minister wanted to. It wasn't my place to interfere. It was his decision. I wouldn't have. I would have said no.
You gave it up?
You went with him. You were part of it. You knew what was going on, and you're not getting citizenship back.
So it's an incredible value
Not
to
that
you.
I'm a vindictive person, you know.
No,
But it was a big value to you in all your portfolios then, that the law applied equally and that we did make sure that entitlements were complied with, whether that was your entitlement to your passport as Christopher Skase or to your Centrelink benefit, or that time in the cops really followed you through.
Loved it.
Yeah.
So
They were great. They were great to work with, really. Coppers are good.
So you spend some time with the coppers.
Yep.
And then you head back to... Welfare.
Yeah.
So they'd started the big Centrelink experiment as you left.
Yeah.
What were your observations coming back? Like how... Because it kind of kept reforming, right? Like you kept...
Well, welfare's hysterical. It really is. I mean, it's a shocking portfolio because it's huge. We were then spending 51 million. God knows what we spend now.
More than that.
A lot. And we had about 7 million people getting some sort of benefit, which include tax rebates, but family tax rebates. But, you know, you hear people complaining about welfare cheats, and these are people who think nothing of going to the opera, which is subsidised for $300 or $400 a seat. You think, who are you? You know?
But that's middle class welfare.
Well, I was going to be so impertinent.
Middle to upper.
Was going to be so impertinent as to suggest that the governments that you were a part of really widened. Something I objected to is a lot of the family tax stuff happened around when I started having children, and I was like, I don't need a relationship with Centrelink. Why would I have a relationship?
The international budget rules insisted that was a welfare payment, not a tax rebate, so it had to go through Centrelink.
Oh, that's really interesting.
we did not
I just had this
fascinating.
objection to the
Howard in
idea.
particular did not want that to go through as a welfare payment.
Okay, because the
It was
expansion
meant to be a
of
tax
that.
benefit.
That is fascinating, and I, in all my years of looking at this, was not aware of that, because I just objected to this increasing number of professionals logging their CRN into a thing to get their $100 a fortnight, and also did they need it? And I appreciate that if it was a tax rebate, that's potentially different.
But those international rules are ridiculous. I mean, I remember when we had the GST, and remember Costello was saying it's just a simple form, you know, what you spend, what you sell, what you spend, blah, blah, blah. So we get the form. There's a whole lot of public servants around talking about the form, and nobody can understand anything on it. And I'm one of the few people, having worked at Myers, who knows what a cost of goods sold is. So I'm looking at this form, what the hell's that? There's no gross sales, cost of goods sold, no words like that.
Yeah.
So I look up at this guy and say, is that first line, is that gross sales? And the next one, is that cost of goods sold? Yes. Well, why don't you put that? Oh, well, the international rules on finance reporting, blah, 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 blah.
Oh,
really?
my goodness.
Well, put that underneath. Like, put cost of goods sold and put that rubbish that
In
you
middle
need to
font.
put for... And I bet they don't say you have to have that on the form you send the public. They say that's how you report on it internationally.
Yeah.
But no, that's what they said we have to put on the form.
I am impressed that you were looking at the form to start off with.
Yeah, Danielle
because
has a...
I have a problem with people overseeing large programs and then going, no, it's fine, it's easy to log in, it's easy to fill out, and they've never actually
Done it.
looked at it and thought, if I can't fill it out, having been in 250 hours of meetings over the last year,
How the hell will anyone else
how
have
the
a go?
hell will anyone else have a go? And then it's the arguments. I used to have lots of arguments with lawyers. They don't always like me. And I ended up having a 2-page fines enforcement form, one that the lawyers liked and one that anyone else could understand. And it was literally one side was lawyer friendly and one side was people friendly. And for a number of years we sent them out like that. In the same way that you're like, you were hearing the international rules of tax.
Yeah.
This was the
No
way
one's
you're
reading
saying that
of
page.
descriptors that must be put on certain categories of financial matters. I mean, I had someone who worked with me. She started as an electoral officer, basically doing reception.
Yeah, saints, all of them, electorate officers.
Her family hadn't recognised that she could have run BHP, really.
Yeah.
Really. She ended up a senior policy advisor or policy advisor, I don't know. Anyway, when we left Coppers and Customs, AGs rang and said, we're really sorry to lose a lawyer like her. She's so good.
A lawyer? I love it.
I said, she didn't do law. Oh, what degree did she do? I said, she didn't do one. Well, she's the best we've ever had. I said, yeah, that's because she knows the job. The job is, does this person qualify for this? What's the criteria for qualifying? Get a list in front of me. Get a list of that person's qualifications, match them, see if they match. If they do, put him in the yes bucket. If they don't, put him in the no bucket. It's as simple as that, really.
You know that she wouldn't get a job in the service anymore without that degree?
No. I had another person who did work in Centrelink, but didn't get as far as he should because he didn't have a degree. And it was stupid. I mean, it's okay maybe now to have that rule.
Is it? No, it's not. Sorry.
I don't know that it is. I said okay maybe now, but what was not okay was to change the rule in a sense retrospectively. That is, if you'd left school, hadn't done a degree, and you then could get into the public service, you still should be able to.
Yeah.
Don't change it retrospectively.
This is an opportunity to give a shout out to the work I've been doing with Flinders. So I am completely with you that there are two tracks going in, particularly to the Commonwealth. So it's graduate programs. And in order to get into them, because they're hard to get into, you've often had to do internships and stuff. So let's face it, you've stayed at home, you've been supported. So that's a road in. You've got 2 degrees, a law and a politics or something, and off you go into your graduate program. And then the hundreds of thousands of people doing immigration processing, Centrelink, Medicare, NDIS, and they can go straight in from school or return after having kids or all that kind of thing. And there is no leadership pathway for them anymore because they don't have that undergraduate degree. And so Flinders has worked on a graduate certificate for which you don't need an undergrad.
Flinders University, to be clear.
So that you can be the team leader. Because to be a team leader in Centrelink with 50 staff and their sick kids and, complex...
Not easy peasy.
Right, they have some of the hardest jobs in government. There's no reason they couldn't one day be the secretary of a department.
No.
And I'm strongly of the view that they need those opportunities to come in without having to go back at 28 and do a Bachelor of Arts.
I agree.
For 50 grand or whatever.
There used to be programs where public servants were shuffled out into the private sector. And if they exist, they should be expanded and not be just for a week, because you don't pick up much in a week.
No. Mike
out there.
told us that Queensland have a really interesting program at the moment about executives in the private sector and the public sector doing kind of joint projects and like trying to understand each other's business so that the private sector understands that we don't make these rules up often for shits and giggles. Sometimes they are for governance, integrity.
Yeah, sure.
Because there's crooks everywhere, including in business.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also the public sector needs to understand that, cost margins are profit margins are profit margins, and time is wasted is money lost, and it's probably not as much of it as there could be. But Mike did talk to us about a series of really interesting things in Queensland.
I think of that in terms of universities. They get about a third of their money from the Commonwealth, and so they have to fill out every damn form you can imagine. Then they fill out forms for the state government and various departments in between, and someone should get it all together and just bring it into one simple, fill this out and we'll have everything we need and we'll share it with everybody.
Yeah.
But getting people to agree to do that might not be easy.
Some of it's the agreement. A lot of it's the cost of the ICT and the fact that ministers can't cut ribbons like they can on schools and hospitals and cancer machines. Like, half of government infrastructure is growing to be ICT systems. But to convince the public why they cost so much and why they need to pay for them is very hard to do.
Yeah, because they can't see it.
Because they can't see it. Yeah. They're the first to complain when they can't get onto MyGov or Veterans Affairs or whatever.
I'll shoot myself. I'd rather talk to Telstra than ring MyGov. I did once strike a person in Hobart at the MyGov Centre. She was fabulous.
Oh, I wanted struck her as in, okay, you ran into her. Oh, okay.
No. On the phone,
We're not confessing to a crime.
No, on the telephone.
No.
I wanted to get her home number. I didn't ask, but I wanted. Because I thought, I'll get you again because you are so good. She was terrific.
But part of the problem, and this is kind of one of the themes that will play out pre and post-election in the Commonwealth, is this question of how much is that workforce insourced versus how much is that workforce done via kind of labour hire firms? And there's a real challenge, I think. I kind of think we're losing pathways for those very junior staff when we rely on labour hire to kind of staff our front line.
Sure. And also, you know, the big consulting firms.
Oh, totally.
People say, well, get a consultant. I think, oh, no, please. You'll get a 25-year-old who's still got pimples, who's never been done over. Mm-hmm. You'll tell us you're going to give us a senior person who will look at the final product but will not do any of the work or produce the report. And, you know, they've got sections that are devoted to getting government work because there's so much out there.
Oh, God, yeah.
Absolutely. They're sort of outsourcing without them having to bear the responsibility of sort of being there the next day when it goes pear-shaped.
The exact thing of living with the consequences. But you lived with the consequences of your decision-making, right?
You have to.
You were
You're
there
stuck there.
through that. How...
Oh, hold on, let me help you. I lived through the consequences of previous ministers' decisions as well.
How does that work for you? How does that feel? Yeah.
Yeah, you want to say that was that little rat. But you can't.
But
you
you
just have to say,
can't.
look, the decision was made, this is what's happened, this is what we're doing. You just don't look back. And that's good advice, actually. Don't look back because you're not going that way. There might be a passing satisfaction in dobbing some idiot in, but it won't fix the problem.
No.
It'll still be there. You'll turn around having given that person a blast.
Yeah.
And the problem will still be sitting there.
Yeah. But do fix the problem, right? So that's
fix that first, and then you don't feel so bad about it.
Because that's one of the lessons of Robodebt, is that there were a sequence of sort of reasonably competent ministers who came through that portfolio, and they all sort of gave this evidence to the Royal Commission where they're like, well, I don't know, like it had been signed off 3 years ago, that minister thought it was legal, Cabinet thought it was legal, I never even, like I just didn't look at it because I just assumed...
It's not the first thing you do is say, well, can I make a guess that one of my colleagues has approved something illegal? You don't imagine they would do that, and they wouldn't have... In my view, I didn't read all that stuff, so I'm not commenting on Robodebt.
No.
But generally speaking, ministers do not set out to approve things that are illegal. So you don't make that assumption. Why would you?
Absolutely. Why would you? So then you kind of need to think, oh, but something feels weird, right?
Well, if something feels weird, then you have to say what's going on here.
Yeah.
And ask all those questions that you mentioned
What's
before.
happening?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, and indeed, so you were Minister for Immigration during some of these something feels weird moments, like Vivian Alvarez and...
Alvarez, God help me, that was a shocker.
So,
do you know, we got onto her because her husband, or partner, I think they'd divorced, rang and got onto my chief of staff just by fluke and said, look, I don't know where she is. They say they can't tell me where she is. I just need to find her. I don't know why I need to find her. So
I think they had a kid.
They could have.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we ring the department and there's a bit of obfuscation, and the chief of staff's not stupid.
They get the spidey senses, like...
I think I'll keep at this. And he did. And eventually they admitted that they'd sent it back to bloody the Philippines.
It's amazing.
And I am not BSing you. I said to someone, hold on. She was a citizen. She would have known she was a citizen. Didn't anyone say, and didn't it show up because you have, when you do raids, you know, on brothels or whatever, you've got a list. Didn't someone say, are you a citizen? And what did she say? No, but she only said it once. Well, she should...
How many times do you have to say it?
Honestly, my jaw dropped. She should only have to say it once. I didn't know what to say after that. What do you say?
But also the luck of getting through to your chief of staff, right? Like,
just luck.
You know, it can be hard to get onto a chief of staff as a senior public servant.
What if he got onto well, I had a great reception person, but what if the reception person said, look, give me the details, I'll pass it on, and pass it on to the DLO, who passed it back to the department, who hid it yet again?
Yep.
What they've done.
And it happens, right?
And they continued to hide it for weeks when we were chasing it.
That's the bit that I find shocking. They did hide it. They knew. There were
weeks
people
and
who
weeks. People who knew, people who'd done it knew, and people who hadn't done it knew.
Yeah.
So aside from the incident then, what made you worry about the culture? And how does a minister then...
That's a pretty bad culture.
...stick their nose into that?
We've maybe not deport's not the right word, but we've dispatched an Australian citizen and we're hiding it, and others are helping us hiding it.
Yeah.
And you're asking me what made me worried? That's pretty worrying, that people would allow that at a reasonably senior level. You think something's not right, and then you start to think, what else has happened like this?
That's
How many times has something else happened that I don't know about? And I could ask them, but they're not going to tell me. I'm going to have to find it.
And so how do you go about that?
Well, because of, now what was her name? Not Elvira Solon.
Vivian
No,
Cornelia
no.
Rao.
Cornelia Rao.
Cornelia Rao.
So we're going to have an inquiry into Cornelia Rao. Now, she was explicable because she did have a mental health problem.
Yeah, that's right. She was saying she was some...
Her family, she'd been not traceable for months, and her family had done nothing. Not because they didn't care, because that was a frequent thing in her life, that she'd just disappear for months on end. She told us she was a German citizen.
That's right. She
Given
kept
us
saying
the
it.
wrong name, so we couldn't find her. So what do you do? So that's all right. We don't know who you are. We'll let you out anyway.
Yeah. So you were going to have an inquiry into that.
Well, we were having an inquiry into Cornelia Rao. And then Elvira Solon happened. Oh, here we go. Now, I don't know about you, but if a mouse runs out under you, this is what I said to the department. Well, we had a full-blown inquiry into Howard. When a mouse runs out of your fridge, you think that's a mouse. When the second one comes a week later, you bring the fridge out and clean it out.
Yeah. Or burn the house down.
So that's what we did.
Yeah.
And we found lots of unlawful detentions that weren't as bad as you might think. I'll give you an example. If you do raids on brothels, you'll have tax, you'll have Centrelink, you'll have every possible imagined department there. And you get a guy and he's at a brothel and he thinks, oh, shell grit. This is going badly. I don't want my family to know. I'll give a false name.
Of course.
They can't
So
find
then
the
they're
name.
not in the citizen's record.
In the system. So he's detained. By about 5 the next morning he thinks, I better get home. They're not going to let me go unless I give my proper name. I think I'll give them my proper name now. But he's been detained.
Yeah. So it's a...
And he was an Australian citizen.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look good.
Yeah.
So as a minister, that's frustrating when it comes up. You detained, 200 or whatever Australian citizens.
Yeah.
You can't say yes, but they're all using prostitutes in line, because they weren't all, but there were a lot.
Yeah.
And then those things happen. It's just life.
Absolutely.
Guys get frightened when they get caught.
But this is the tenor of how you find stinky things in the public service, right? So if you send out 10,000 letters, a few of them will be inaccurate, like in the law of averages. There's always exceptions to rules when you run massive systems.
Oh, yeah, you mean like we're telling you how much you owe or something?
How much you owe, or
An
even
error,
just, like school report cards. Anything you do en masse, there'll be an error in a certain number.
Guaranteed.
And so, and you're often only meeting with the secretary, maybe a couple of DepSecs or very senior people. And so the trick for a minister and a secretary is, how do you tell exceptions to rules from systemic kind of like stuff-uppery, and also how do you get a sense of culture? Like, how do you know whether... And this is the balance that I think secretaries, not just ministers on their own, secretaries are often like, they use their survey results and stuff, but the question is, do I have that culture or not? And it's hard to... It's not always easy to figure out from the top.
No, I suppose it's not. I thought Andrew Metcalfe did a great job when he took over immigration. He took over a department that, because of the previous minister, had turned itself very much into a law enforcement department rather than an immigration department. I never approved of having a big home affairs portfolio. John Fahey wanted to have one when we were in government, and I opposed it. Because we're an immigration nation, that's who we are.
That's right.
And it's a critical, and that's a welcoming thing.
Yeah.
Now, sure, we need a law enforcement part of it, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But you don't want the welcoming, we bring you from near and far bit to be squashed.
That's right.
Which I think it is if you shove it into too much
National security.
Well, you
sort
used
of
to
law
have
enforcement aspect.
multicultural as your portfolio, like it was immigration and multicultural affairs.
Yeah. And I think we've lost a bit of that, and we should get it back.
I was talking about how tricky it is to know. Like, before you get a phone call from Vivian out and it somehow gets to your chief of staff, it's so hard to know whether you do have a culture in a department.
No, it is.
That is swishing
you
things
have
or
to
not.
just spot the mouse under the fridge. Too many ants in that corner. They're always in that corner.
Why?
Just like you do at home. The ants are always in that corner. Why are they there?
Yeah.
So you go and look there. We'll never have any trouble here.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
But you have to want to. And I think that is one of the challenges, right? Like, you, as a minister, if there are things happening that kind of twig with you and you're like, it doesn't look right. But if those things that are happening don't, if you aren't obsessed with the idea that you're doing the right thing every day, then you can look past stuff that's bad. And that, like, it's a lesson from Robodebt, right? Like, they were getting a lot of letters from people.
No, you shouldn't be, because your name's on the bottom of the paper. You can say, oh, I think something's wrong, but it'll be okay. I might be risk averse, but I'd look and think, and when that blows up, it's going to come all over my face. That's why ministers sign on the bottom line. That's why you get paid.
Yeah.
Because in the end, you have to say, something's not right.
Yeah.
Now, someone gave me some really good advice, a former public servant. She had a number of bits of advice, but the best one was, you'll get a brief and it'll be signed off by the Secretary or DepSec, someone else, and down the bottom it'll have prepared by. Ring that person.
I love it.
Yep. They were usually shocked.
Scared.
They would say,
Oh my God,
I'm
imagine
just tired
being
today.
there
Can
so
I ring
far.
you back? Yeah, sure. Will you be long? No. And I can remember one day I said to someone, so-and-so will be up from the department soon, one of the DepSecs. She said, you got an appointment? I said, no, but she'll be up. And sure enough, he obviously rang and said, she's rung and asked about this. So the person comes up. I was just passing by seeing someone else. Is there anything you want to know? No, thanks. Everything's fine. Did you get the brief on? Yep. Everything good with that? Yep. Thank you.
That was great advice that person
Desperate.
gave you.
She wanted to come and be the person who was telling me.
Yeah, didn't want
not
the
person
ASO5.
who prepared the stuff.
Who knew the stuff.
Who got the documents together to refine it and give us the not watered down version, the narrowed down version.
Yeah.
You could say, where'd you get the figures for that? Who said that?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I still love that. I'm going to ring the person who prepared this.
Sometimes you must have got a shock, because sometimes when the person looks at the minute that made it through, they're like, oh, some of the things I put in that minute have changed on the way up.
Because what the prepared by person sent up.
Gets ordered, does it?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I don't like I knew that.
Interesting, that never occurred. Good.
Yeah, that's interesting. What was your longest portfolio? I'm just interested in, like, your depth of knowledge of these portfolios.
I don't know, probably, 4 to 7, no. I think they're all 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. Was that enough time? I mean, again, when you look at things that go wrong systemically over time, it's often a high turnover of ministers as well.
Yeah, but look, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, right.
Because I used to look at some ministers who always had the same portfolio in opposition and in government, especially if they had a portfolio that didn't have a large constituency, like not a lot of students, not a lot of asylum seekers, just maybe a few media that knew about their topic, and public a bit reluctant to have a go at you because they didn't understand the issues, like Treasury and Foreign Affairs would be classics. Small group of people you need to manage.
Yeah.
Not a big group of people ready to jump into that debate. Dreamland. Higher ed, hundreds of thousands of students angry, not dreamland.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what'd you ask me again?
Oh, just about whether the high turnover makes it hard to get across the brief. But you're saying high turnover can help sometimes because you bring fresh eyes to it? Or?
Absolutely, and you might just get sucked in and just coast along. I don't accuse anyone of doing this, but you might get too comfortable. You know, it'd be hard to maintain your inquisitiveness and freshness over a 7-year period, I would have thought.
Yeah, 3 to 4 years
you know,
seems
the first
optimal.
year's a bit rough. But I think you should look at it this way. You know, I mean, you get charged with murder, you'll get a lawyer and you'll get a KC who'll get a brief. They'll read the brief and they'll have your life, well, not your life because we don't have the death penalty, but they'll have the rest of your life in jail or not in their hands, having read a brief about that thick.
Yeah.
Well, I think being a minister is the same.
You should be able to get across it.
You should be able to read the brief, and the brief should be good enough that it tells you what's happening. And if it's not, you say to the person, or the person in charge of that person, don't let that person give me a brief again unless it's good, because that one wasn't. Here's what was wrong with it. You should be able to... That's what I used to say. It's just like being a barrister. You get a new case.
That's fascinating.
That's a great metaphor.
It also depends. Yeah, right.
It requires on you having that KC-like aptitude
Well, the person
as a minister.
The person who prepares the brief has to be good. Yeah. Look, if you give a KC a dud brief, they won't necessarily get you off, even though you're innocent.
Yeah.
So you have to work
service
together.
are the solicitors in this scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you left government, you came back in 2013.
No, 2010.
2010.
27 to 210 in Rome, yeah.
In Rome, brilliant. I was thinking about your role as a commissioner on the National Commission of Audit. Is that what it was called?
Yep.
So that was 13, 14, something like that.
Yeah.
So that's like a fascinating enterprise.
Absolutely.
Tell us about it.
Well, it was fascinating. I mean, a mix of people on there.
Yeah.
I can remember one person saying, you know, I'd cancel every Indigenous spending issue. And I thought, oh, you're right, I'm crazy. And he said I'd take all that money and more and I'd put it into Indigenous education. And he said, I know there'd be people who'd be unhappy, there'd be Indigenous programs that wouldn't be funded. But he said kids would get a chance.
So it wasn't the usual suspects in the way people were there thinking.
Not at all.
How does it work?
What?
Yeah, how did it work?
The National Commission of Audit.
Did they come
Well,
to
you
you
look
with
at whatever you want.
everyone's...
You have finance people there and you say, we want to look at this. Get us a brief on this.
Oh my God, it's like professional meddling.
Yes.
Oh, it's my dream come true. How did you get a gig?
You know, we would like a list of all the statutory authorities, government, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Sorted by policy issue, by region, by income. And we'll have a look at it. You might give us some ideas what we could do.
Did you get good advice? Because if I was providing advice to a National Commission of Audit, my old department, for example, I would have a list already of the dozen things I think
And
we
you
should
thought
stop
should go.
doing. Right? Is that how public servants responded to this
Well,
opportunity?
the finance people as
but they don't know.
well, they think
Not
they do.
treasury. I'm not
I
interested in
meant real
that.
people who do the work. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no,
Sorry,
they
treasury
did.
colleagues.
They did, and that's fair enough because, you know, they're in a department, they see this and they might suggest to someone up top that be cut, and that person might think, no, I don't think we're going to suggest that, you know, for whatever reason. So they get a chance to put their view. Why not? It's there for you to put your view and get considered.
Did you
Nothing
get lots
wrong
of
with
that?
putting a view. Don't know about lots. It's a bit hard to remember. It was a while ago now. But
If Caroline gets to ask about national audit committees, I get to ask about...
incidentally, I think an incoming government should have another one.
That's why I was asking, because I can imagine an incoming Dutton government, for example,
Doesn't
would
matter which
strongly contemplate it.
Should have one.
Yeah,
Just go through and say, what are we doing? What does this body do?
yeah.
You know, it
form a view.
exists, doesn't have much on its plate, but no one says get rid of it. It files its report, does its job, could be merged with another lot.
Yeah, or why isn't it doing anything? Like why?
Because no one said,
Yeah.
nobody gets the report, so nobody says where's the report. Just sit there.
I mean, it's a form of zero-based budgeting that we don't do very often and could and should do on a regular term regardless of style of government. And I think if the public service doesn't grab the opportunity to get rid of stupid stuff, then you get doged, right? Like
Sure.
it gets run over the top of you if you
Well-
are not constantly grappling with getting rid of stupid stuff.
Pare down. Look, I told you I worked for Myers to do a buying training thing, and one of the girls who did it as well, I bumped into on Unley Road when I had a small business on Unley Road. I thought, oh, hello, what are you doing? Oh, she said, I'm in unemployment now. I said, what do you mean? She said, I run the Abode of the Friendly Toad down the road.
The abode of the
A
friendly
community youth support scheme.
toad. Right, okay.
I said, what's that? Oh, community youth support scheme. She said, didn't you know there's money in unemployment now? She had no background in unemployment. And she said, we just run a few courses a week, you know, blah, 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 for unemployed people. Try and get them jobs. She says, great, really. So, when I became minister, I said, you give me a list of where those community youth support schemes are, or whatever they became. So you wouldn't have it on your list. The department knew where you're going.
Yeah.
But if you were near one, you'd swing by. You'd be surprised the number we swing by that were just shut that day accidentally. Someone was sick. Or you'd go and say, I've come to look at what courses you've got on today. Oh, we don't run classes on Tuesdays. Oh, no, what do you do? Oh, admin work. Oh, right, okay. So So
Because no one's
you get what
unemployed
you
on Tuesdays.
inspect, not what you expect.
That is also a product, though, of outsourcing. So it's
It
much
is.
harder for public servants to just shut
Yeah.
up the front of
Sure,
the shop
no,
on a
it is.
Tuesday.
I agree. But equally, there's the other side of it that when I knew someone well who worked in the old Commonwealth Employment Service, and he'd keep his job whether he got more people jobs or not. So if he's having a bad day, didn't care, it didn't matter. So there's twos and fros, but the point you raise is a good one, because it is, in a sense, much harder when you outsource to check what's being done with the money. Much harder for the public service to keep a check on that. So the minister makes the decision, the government makes the decision, we will help people live in their home.
Yep.
And we're going to give millions of dollars to it. You get a headline, all sounds very good. And then it's divided up by state, and there's tenders, and someone decides whether the tenders go by, region or value of service or type of service. And then the public service does it.
Yep.
And somehow they're meant to keep a check on what happens with that money, and that isn't easy.
Especially money that flows from the Commonwealth to the state to local and stuff.
Yeah,
That's even
very
worse.
hard.
But what you just touched on with that CES employee is that we find industrial relations change in the public service too hard, so we create, this is my view, outsourced programs, because it's like, well, here's the KPI and it's a contract, so it's easier to manage, whereas a lot of those things could be done in the service with performance measures, with some industrial changes, but that always seems to be something that is too hard to do, and it's much easier to say, company X, here's your 100K, here's what the contract says you have to deliver for it, than deliver it as a service, knowing that some people will underperform and you'll have to manage
you see,
them.
we said we're not privatising the CS. We're going to tender this out, and they can compete. And in the first tender, they did really well. They got lots of contracts around. Next one, not so well. Couldn't compete. But the private sector people will tell you, or would tell you, that there was churning. If you were doing that, even if you're not for profit, maybe particularly so, I don't know, you would look for where do you get the most money. You get the most money with the people that are harder to place.
Yeah.
If you didn't place them well, they might come back 12 months later and you get the money again. And you get the money again.
Yeah.
So that's called churning. And that's not good for people either.
No, there's some...
So, to be fair, you've got to work out how you're going to pay for these people who get you a job. Well, you're going to give a lesser amount to someone who's easy to get a job,
Yeah.
a middle amount to someone who's got a few problems, and a lot for someone who's got a lot of problems. Sensible.
Yeah.
But then monitoring how it happens is not easy, even if you do that within the public service. How you get that to happen,
Absolutely.
actually make it happen, is harder than policy.
And I think, interestingly, sort of 20 years out from some of those reforms now, one of the challenges is how much expertise there is in contract management in the Commonwealth for knowing what good looks like. Like, they've got so far from having delivered those services themselves, they're managing contracts out in employment services land. Then you end up with a very kind of procurement-led approach to contract management, which isn't an outcomes-led approach to contract management. And you can really see there's a live discussion at the moment around how do you move towards a model of contract management which involves much more, relational contracting, thinking about what the outcomes you're going for are. But that requires the public service to actually know what good looks like. Like, you have to have delivered an employment service and know that a course 1 hour a week is not a good format and doesn't tend to get people back into work.
You have to be turning up on a Tuesday, and I don't mean the compliance team.
You have to know what good looks like. You've got to see it. Go in and see who's coming.
Yeah.
These are practical applications of real life problems.
Yeah.
The guy that oversaw that in my office was someone from Treasury who left Treasury to come work for me, turned down a job at Flinders with Judith Sloan, and got the job of a lifetime for a competition economist.
It is a pretty cool job. Design the market.
To be there and bring that together and then set up his own consulting firm in the UK on competition, no surprise. And is still doing that in a limited way now because he'd be nearly 60 now, I suppose. a terrific opportunity for a young guy
Yeah.
with that kind of knowledge. But there were lots of discussions, not arguments, but discussions about how to divide the contracts up.
Yeah.
You know, by how small a region. Do you need to have someone who's got stuff in every state? Mm-hmm. Can someone be a one-off provider? Is that efficient? Is it unfair to say, no, you're only doing one contract, we can't be bothered monitoring you, it's too much, you know, we need bigger, cleaner. It was bigger, cleaner, not cleaner, messy.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff that people don't see. I mean, maybe next time there's a big job like this, someone should have the brains to get a documentary team in and document it. And just show what the questions are that have to be asked, and that ministers and senior public servants do sit around and do worry about
Oh, yes.
how to do this. And the person at home would think, yeah, that wouldn't be easy figuring that out, would it?
Yeah.
Yeah, how would I do that?
Yeah. And you don't just
we
do
were
it
just
once.
offered a challenge here.
I know, yeah, I'm just thinking.
I think we were just asked to make a documentary on a complex policy problem.
It's true. But don't you think, I think the
Well,
thing...
I mean, people would get an insight into how much work does go into it behind the scenes, and it's a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
Public service does a lot of work that gets discarded because there are options and they, you know, get discarded.
Exactly. And you don't set and forget. Like, that's the other thing. It's not like you make a decision around introducing a competitive market into employment services and then it's like, okay,
Bingo.
well, that's all our decisions are made.
Yeah.
You've got to keep checking.
Yes,
And
exactly.
keep learning.
Yep.
And that's, I think, one of my anxieties is that when we move to a model of the public service where people are generalised and kind of moving around a lot, that kind of learning, how do you know what good looks like? You kind of need people to be in place for a bit of time to actually
Yeah,
spend
although
some time.
maybe moving around is a good thing. Yeah.
It's always a mix.
Yeah, it is a mix, I agree. Staying in the same place, I don't think is a good idea
I'm
for
a bit more with
everyone.
you.
But I do think too much moving around, you don't pick up anything.
Yeah, you don't learn.
Yeah.
You just think it's like, oh, it's a textbook. We're
Yeah.
creating a textbook
We
market.
follow this page, we do that.
Danielle, did you have any final questions?
Well, I am.
I do have one final question.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to get edited out here.
She
but-
might. Oh, my God, you're going to ask about the football. She is totally about to ask about the football. Okay, sure. Can I ask mine first then?
Oh, fine.
Mine was lots of Commonwealth public servants will be thinking about how to win the trust of the Conservative side of government. If
I don't know why you say Conservative, it's just right of centre, not necessarily that far right.
Yep. How to win the trust of a coalition government, should coalition form government. Any advice for them, or do you like any advice at all?
Well, listen to the early part of this podcast where you'll hear about a guy whose last name was Phillips. And go along and demonstrate what you know, share what you know,
Yep.
guide the minister through it, give the minister choices, and just say to them, if you do this, this will happen, and this is why it will happen.
Yeah.
These are the people who will complain, these are the people who will be happy. Give them more and more detail and let them work through it. I would have trusted that guy in my life.
I love that. All right, Danielle, you can ask your question.
We share a love of the great and mighty Port Adelaide Football Club. Do you draw leadership? Did you ever draw leadership lessons from the football, and what was it like kind of serving on the Port Adelaide Football Club board?
No, I wasn't involved in football when I was in government.
No. Sad.
Yeah. I came back and I'd always said I didn't like being a one-team town with the Crows. It was just Crows. It was just so boring. You know, that
boring.
little guy with blonde hair with short shorts that everyone raved about.
Modra.
Modra. If I see him on the front page of the paper again, I'm going to scream. So I'm going with whoever they get next. That's what I said. Just.
So you weren't an original Port Adelaide football
No.
supporter. You were just anti-Crows.
Contrarian.
That's even better.
So I said,
in
I'm
some
going
ways.
with them. So I went to a few games. I got invited to a few games. And I think somebody... I joined up one of those 3-game membership things and went to a couple of games, and someone said to me, a government advisory firm person said, you're going to the grand final. This is 2004. And I said, no. How would I get a ticket to that? He said, are you know-whatting me? They've got a cabinet minister as one of their supporters and they haven't invited me. I said, well, why would they? He said, why wouldn't they? Well, I don't know. Anyway, a few days later I get an invite. He must have rung them up and said, "You lunatics."
Absolutely.
So I got to go to the 2004 grand final where Wanganeen did that bang, up, kicked it again. Fantastic.
Oh,
But I'm sitting in front of Howard. And I had to turn, because they just filed all the people from there.
yeah.
I had to turn around and say, "Look, actually in AFL we don't clap both sides."
And certainly Port Adelaide supporters
We
do not
just
clap
don't.
both
We
sides.
don't. That's how it works.
You pick a side and you stick
And
with it.
then Cotty rang me one day and said, "Look, you know, would you consider coming on the board?" I said, "You do know I know nothing about running football clubs, don't you?" Nothing.
But you know how to ask questions.
Zero. He said, "That'd make you fantastic." So then I rang Raymond Nogarotto, who used to run Soccer Australia years ago. I said, "I just had this weird phone call from Kosh about Port Adelaide." And he said, "Would I like to be on the board?" And I told him I know nothing about football clubs, how to run them. He said, "That'd make you perfect." I said, "Oh, that's what he said." He said, "The clubs are too full of people who think they know about football. They don't realise it's a club and it's much more than the game. That's the coach's job largely. Give it a go."
And did you love it?
Yeah, I did. I did it for about 6 years. And I think that's enough for most things. 6 to 9 years is enough. You should move on and let other people have a go. I spent a week when I look at some of the football boards that people have been there for too long.
Oh, I couldn't agree more.
I move on.
I mean, the Crows definitely don't have a particular board member who's been on for too long who needs to leave anyway.
You have lived an extraordinary life, and you.
I've been lucky. You know that? It was the A.D. Facey who wrote A Fortunate Life.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, well, he got it wrong. I got that life.
You have lived an extraordinary life, and
Lucky
I'm
as all hell.
so grateful for you sharing your expertise with our listeners today.
Yeah, till next time.
Pleasure.
Just some appropriately bureaucratic disclaimers. While we've tried to be as thorough in our research as busy full-time jobs and lives allow, we definitely don't guarantee that we've got all the details right. Please feel free to email us corrections, episode suggestions or anything else at thewestminstertraditionpod@gmail.com. Thanks to Pampot Audio for our intro and outro music. Till next time.